$25.6 million. That's how much a single employee at a global engineering firm transferred to criminals in January 2024. Not because he was careless, not because he ignored his training, because he joined a video call with his chief financial officer and several colleagues, people he recognized, people he'd worked with, and every single one of them was a deepfake. Artificially generated faces, cloned voices, a completely fabricated meeting that looked and sounded indistinguishable from the real thing. He'd been suspicious of the email that started it. He thought it might be a scam. The video call is what convinced him it wasn't. Now, I want you to hold that story in your mind, because we're going to work backwards from it. We're going to trace how phishing went from the Nigerian prince, a scam so crude it became a joke, to that video call. And the journey between those 2 points is not just a story about better technology. It's a story about a fundamental shift in what deception looks like and why the defenses that worked for 2 decades have quietly become obsolete. Let's go back to where it started. 1995. America Online is the internet for most people. Chat rooms are where everything happens. And in those chat rooms, a small community of hackers started running what were probably the first phishing operations in history. The method is almost comically simple. Pretend to be an America Online employee. Message someone. Tell them there is a problem with their account. Ask them to hand over their password. The messages were bad, typos, broken grammar, formatting that looked nothing like an official communication, and they worked anyway. They worked because nobody had ever seen this before. There was no frame of reference. The idea that someone online might not be who they claimed to be barely existed in most people's minds. There was no pattern for the brain to match against. No instinct that said, "This feels wrong." If you had never seen a scam before, you had no reason to suspect you were looking at one. This matters because it tells you something important about how phishing has always operated. It was never really about the quality of the fake. It was about whether the target had a reason to doubt it. In 1995, nobody did. The bar for deception was on the floor, and even terrible fakes cleared it. Then came the email that changed everything. May 4th, 2000. Inboxes around the world receive a message with the subject line, "I love you." The body is one sentence. Kindly check the attached love letter coming from me. Tens of millions of people opened it. It was a virus. It spread across the globe in hours. The estimated damage was $10 billion. Now, what is interesting about the "I love you" virus is not the technical payload. It is the delivery mechanism, the subject line. 2 words that bypass every rational filter in the human brain and go straight to something emotional. Curiosity. Hope. The possibility that someone out there has feelings for you. It did not matter that the email was generic, that it came from a stranger, that the attachment was suspicious. The emotional hook fired before any of that could be evaluated. And that principle, trigger the emotion before the analysis, became the foundational playbook for everything that followed. Every evolution in phishing over the next 25 years is essentially a more sophisticated version of that same trick. The feelings change. The delivery changes. But the core mechanism stays the same. Get the target to act before they think. Through the 2000s, phishing professionalized. And I mean that literally. It developed a labor market. There were developers building fake login pages that were near-perfect replicas of real banking sites. Programmers wrote software for mass email distribution. Data brokers compiled and sold harvested email lists. And at the end of the chain, cash-out specialists converted stolen credentials into money through networks of mule accounts. By the middle of the decade, one infrastructure provider, the Russian business network, was hosting roughly half of all phishing operations worldwide. A single collective operating through that network reportedly pulled $150 million from banks in 1 year. And between 2004 and 2005, an estimated 1.2 million Americans lost a combined $929 million to phishing. But even as the scale exploded, the craft was still relatively crude. The fake pages looked more real. The sender addresses were better spoofed. But the emails themselves still had tells, awkward phrasing, grammar that felt slightly off, web addresses that did not quite match. If you were paying attention, and this is the key, if you were using what psychologists would call your slow, deliberate, analytical brain, you could usually spot them. So, security training built its entire approach around that. Teach people the red flags. Check the sender address. Hover over links before clicking. Look for grammatical errors. Be suspicious of urgency. And for about 15 years, that advice was genuinely useful. It was not perfect. Plenty of people still got caught. But the basic framework, slow down and look for the tells, was a legitimate defense. Because the tells were real. They were there. You just had to look. I want you to remember that, because what happened next is why that entire framework collapsed. Around 2020, phishing started getting personal. Not personal in the dear valued customer sense. Personal in the sense that attackers knew your name, your job title, your recent projects, and who your boss is. Spear phishing had existed before this, but it was expensive. Researching a single target took hours. Crafting a convincing personalized email for one person was a manual process that did not scale. So it was mostly reserved for high-value targets, executives, government officials, people with access to large sums of money. The rest of the world got the generic stuff. What changed was automation. Tools could scrape LinkedIn profiles, company websites, social media, and public records in minutes. Tools could cross-reference that data and generate context-aware messages at scale. A phishing email that references your actual project name, your actual colleague's name, and a plausible scenario related to your actual job does not trigger the same alarm bells as Dear Customer. Your account has been compromised. It feels like a normal Tuesday. Business email compromise became the most financially devastating variant of this approach. An attacker would either hack into or impersonate a trusted contact, usually someone in a position of authority, a chief executive, a chief financial officer, a vendor, or a lawyer, and use that trust to redirect wire transfers. The requests were not outlandish. They were mundane. Can you process this invoice? We need to update our banking details for the next payment. Please handle this before end of day. By 2024, business email compromise was responsible for nearly $2.8 billion in reported losses in the United States alone. It was the second most costly category of cybercrime, despite being only the seventh most reported. Which tells you something. Each attack that succeeds tends to succeed catastrophically. But even business email compromise, sophisticated as it was, still relied on text. Words on a screen. And words on a screen, no matter how well written, still left a gap that a careful reader could sometimes catch. A slightly off email address. a request that did not quite follow normal procedure, a tone that was close but not exactly right. That gap is what artificial intelligence closed. Here is where the story takes a turn that I think a lot of people have not fully processed yet. By mid-2024, an estimated 40% of business email compromise phishing emails were being generated by artificial intelligence. Not assisted by it, generated by it. Large language models, the same technology behind tools you probably use every day, ingest someone's public writing, their email style, their communication patterns, and produce messages that match perfectly. Not pretty close. Perfectly. Think about what that means for the red flag approach. Grammar mistakes, the things security training spent years teaching people to look for, are gone. Tonal inconsistencies, gone. Awkward phrasing that does not quite sound like something your bank would write, gone. Artificial intelligence writes more fluently than most humans. The tells that the entire defense framework was built around have been systematically erased. And it is not just better writing, it is better targeting. Artificial intelligence can process thousands of data points about a person, their role, their recent activity, their communication network, their likely concerns, and craft a message that is not just grammatically correct, but contextually perfect. An email that references a real meeting you attended last week, a real deadline you are facing, sent in the exact style of a person you actually work with. One documented campaign targeted 800 accounting firms. Each email referenced state registration details specific to that firm. The click rate was 27%. More than 1 in 4 professionals, people whose job is to handle sensitive financial information carefully, clicked. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night about this. Email was always just one channel, and now it's just the starting point. A usable clone of someone's voice can now be generated from 3 seconds of audio. I want to say that again because I think it's easy to hear and not really absorb. 3 seconds. A voicemail greeting. A clip from a conference talk. A snippet from a podcast appearance. That is enough to create a synthetic version of someone's voice that can say anything the attacker wants in real time. Deepfake voice phishing, known as phishing, surged over 1,600% in the first quarter of 2025. Researchers have documented artificially intelligent scam call centers that combine synthetic voices with language model-driven conversation, adapting in real time to what the victim says. These are not recordings. They are interactive. And then there is video. We know it is possible because we have already seen it work. The Arup case I opened with, the $25 million deepfake video call, was not a prototype or a proof of concept. It was a real attack against a real company that actually worked. The attackers harvested publicly available video of the company's executives from conferences and online content, used it to train deepfake models, and rendered multiple synthetic people in real time on a live video call convincing enough to fool a colleague who knew them. No system was hacked. No password was stolen. No network was penetrated. The attack bypassed every technical defense the company had because it did not target any of them. It targeted the person. And this is the evolution I am trying to trace. In 1995, a phishing attack was a badly typed message in a chat room. In 2000, it was a virus hidden behind an emotional subject line. In 2010, it was a carefully crafted email impersonating your bank. In 2020, it was a personalized message referencing your real projects and real colleagues. In 2025, it is your chief financial officer's face on a video call, telling you in their own voice to make a transfer that feels completely routine. At every stage, the attack got harder to distinguish from reality. And at every stage, the defense that worked before stopped working. Not because people got dumber, but because the gap between fake and real got smaller until it effectively disappeared. So where does that leave us? I'll be honest, I don't think there's a clean answer. And I'm suspicious of anyone who claims there is. The red flag approach that worked for 15 years has been neutralized by artificial intelligence. Voice verification, calling them to confirm, is becoming unreliable when the voice on the other end might be cloned. Even video, which we've always treated as the gold standard of identity confirmation, can now be faked in real time. We're reaching a point where the question shifts from, can you spot the fake, to have you built systems that do not require you to. And that shift from perceptual defense to procedural defense is, I think, the most important transition in cybersecurity right now. It means the answer isn't sharper eyes, it's better processes. Mandatory dual authorization for transfers above a threshold. Callback procedures using pre-established numbers, never numbers from the message itself. Out-of-band verification for any change to payment details, meaning you confirm through a completely separate channel. These are boring defenses. They create friction. They slow things down. And that slowdown is exactly the point. Every procedure that forces a pause in the chain of action is a procedure that gives your analytical brain a chance to engage before your instincts finish the job. On a personal level, the most useful thing I can tell you, and I realize how simple this sounds, is to pay attention to how messages make you feel. When an email creates urgency, when a request triggers anxiety, when something makes you want to act immediately, notice that. That feeling isn't random. In many cases, it was specifically engineered. And the moment you notice it, the moment you think, wait, why do I feel like I need to do this right now, is the moment you've bought yourself the half second that matters. You won't catch everything. Nobody does. Not cybersecurity experts, not professional scam baiters, not the most careful, vigilant person you know. The targets who get hurt worst are usually the ones who were most certain it couldn't happen to them. The Nigerian prince email and the deepfake video call are separated by 30 years. In that time, phishing went from something you could spot from across the room to something that can fool you while you're looking right at it. The technology changed completely. The vulnerability it exploits didn't change at all. It's still you. It was always you. The best defense isn't a sharper eye. It's a slower hand. Thank you for watching. If anything in this video changed how you think about your own inbox, or if there is a topic you want me to dig into next, let me know in the comments. I will see you in the next one.